Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Chris Bircher, Director of Technical Services here at CTC. And today we are going to take a dive into one of the apps from the BIM batch suite, called Project Processor. But before I begin, I want to encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the duration of the presentation. I will do my best to answer those questions as they come in line with what I'm talking about. If I don't get to them during the presentation, I will make sure to have some time at the end to answer any and all remaining questions that are left. I also want to mention that this is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel shortly after the presentation has completed. With that said, let's go for it. So today we're talking about Project Processor from our BIM batch suite. So the biggest issue and the reason why we have this, one of the reasons why we have this tool in the first place is to deal with messy projects, right? So projects get bloated. They increase in file size and can do so quickly, and it can be drastic at times. Which can cause unnecessary errors or model crashing and performance degradation. And it makes delivering the model that much more difficult, especially on deadline days, right? We always tend to run into problems when we reach print day or when we're approaching our deadlines. And going through the motions of cleaning all that stuff up, one category or one piece at a time, one object at a time, is very time consuming, and being consistent with that process is also a challenge because we don't always remember what we did the last time we did it unless you've been a superstar and written it all down, right? And you've created this checklist of sorts, right? So what we've got here today and what I'm going to cover with you today is a process or an app that has a process where we can do some of this cleanup, whether it's before a deadline or maybe the project's over and we need to clean out a few things before we archive the file. Or maybe I've received a model from an architect or an engineer and there's a number of things in there that I know I don't need, and we can, parse the file down a bit prior to loading that into our project file as a link. Or maybe you want to be courteous and do the same thing on the other end, and prior to sending it off for someone else to link in, do some cleanup on it because there's things they don't need, right? Especially on these really large projects where you've got half a dozen or more Revit links and everything's in the hundreds of megs range, and coordination and project times, that starts to get a little challenging. So anything we can do to increase performance at that point is huge. So a couple of things we're going to go over today is we're just going to take you on a quick tour through the user interface, where everything, where the tool is at, how the tool is broken out, and what different tasks can be done within the app itself. Then I'm going to show you how to execute on these procedures and basically how to build it all out, and then where the execution button is, and how to make this a repeatable process on future projects or other current projects that you've got going on in your organization. And then for those who don't have access or don't know where to find the tools, I'm going to show you where to find them. And then for everyone, where we can get some additional resources about the products. So with that, if you've seen my presentations before, I don't like doing PowerPoints. So we're just going to jump right in. All right. So you've seen this file before. This is my standard demo set. We all know that. But it's got a lot of stuff in here that isn't necessary. A lot of cleanup I can do on this. A lot of stuff that's perfect for processing with our tool here. So our project processor is part of the BIM batch suite. It's the purple set of tools found on the CTC productivity tab over here on the left side. And there's, if you're familiar with it, there's a handful of other tools there, some free, some licensed. Project Processor is part of our licensed package. So yeah. So when you open Project Processor, you get, for the most part, a blank screen. And this first tab, and it's broken kind of into two key areas. The first page allows you to specify which projects or Revit files you want to process. Okay, it can be a Revit file, it can be multiple Revit files, it can be all of the Revit files within a project or within all of your projects, right? It all depends on what the tasks are going to be and when you need them run. If you want to try to get them all done in one shot, you more certainly can. It's going to take some time, obviously, but the option is there. The second tab here is the processes tab. This is your tasks tab. So all of the different commands and procedures that need to be run on the project or projects. Okay. And then we have some options at the top for setting up new configurations, loading up existing ones, clearing everything out, saving them out, and configuring the size and position. So, the basics. So first and foremost, I'm just going to hit new config. We're going to clear everything out, start from scratch, and jump to it. So there's, on the front end, there's, as I mentioned it in my intro here, there's a couple of different scenarios that we can utilize this tool for, right? So say we're coming up on a deadline, like the 100% CD set, and we have to submit the model to someone, right? Whether it's for the owner to have a copy of for their FM models, or maybe it's you're sending it off to the architect so that they can use it as the backgrounds for them, or maybe it's just getting really large and we've identified some key areas that need to be cleaned up and we're going to clean them out, or the project's over, we're archiving it, right? So, and then there's more. I'm sure you guys are creative. You can think of more reasons why you should use this tool. So now I'm going to pick the files that I want. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can either manually browse to the file itself and add it that way. You can add a folder and grab all the Revit files within a folder, so the project, for example. Or you can do the current Revit file, which is great, especially if you're trying to set your template up, right? So maybe you have a file open that has a lot of the standards in it, a lot of the key things that you want to keep, and maybe switch things over to at some point. So it's, now I can build my primary configuration that I use as at least the starting point for the process on all my projects, or on a majority of my projects. So that's kind of the scenario I'm going to follow at this point, is I'm going to use this to set up the beginning stages of my template. So I'm going to hit the add open projects option, and it's showing I have two open, which is fine, because I do. One of them is the one I want to work on. The other one actually is the example I need to show you after the fact, because I did run it just before the presentation to make sure you guys could see some of the results today. So I'm just going to remove that one. Now, if you ever say were to add a project folder worth of Revit files and there's something in there that you don't want to process, right? Maybe you keep your project files and your linked models in the same folder. That's fine. You don't have to process the links if you don't want to, and you can remove those from the set. No big deal. And it does remember your previously used settings, so maybe you want to switch the Revit files, so you'll have to remove them at some point anyway. And it tells you where everything is. So now I jump to the second tab, and this is the key area for setting up what you want to do. So there's a lot of things we can do. Think of this, project processor is effectively a smorgasbord of a number of other CTC tools from various suites. We have swapping abilities, we've got renaming abilities, we've got, parameter addition abilities, length modification abilities. So we've kind of merged features from a number of apps from the manager suite and the project suite into project processor. And even there's a feature or two from another tool in the batch suite where we've put it all together, and now I can run them all at the same time instead of having to open up these other tools. And these other tools are great because now maybe I only need to swap a few things, or maybe I only need to add some parameters. So now I can reference those tools like Type Swapper or Share Parameter Manager or spreadsheet link, right? And I can go ahead and do some modifications to tools and renaming of views and sheets and stuff like that, or a little bit of project cleaner to purge a few things out, right? So it's nice to have the ability to use a smaller tool for more on demand. This allows us to do it all at once. For starters, I'm going to hit check none and uncheck everything. I'm going to start with a clean slate, no settings defined. And the left side here controls all the different kind of categories of things that we can do. And then in the main body of the window here is where you configure everything based on what your heart desires. So the scripts tabs here at the top and at the bottom, so at the beginning and at the end, these are intended to give you the opportunity to run a process before and or after you manipulate your Revit files. So for example, maybe there was a plugin you needed to install to do a thing, or maybe, here's a better example. Maybe you needed to download the files off your SharePoint and you had a script that did that. So, because you're receiving a model, or at the end of the process, we need to post it to our SharePoint or to our FTP site for someone else to use. I can have a batch routine or a PowerShell script that will do that download or upload, depending on what stage of the game you need to run that tool or that process, right? So I can bundle that into this package so it's not something I have to do secondarily after the fact or beforehand. I don't have any scripts, so I'm just gonna leave these unchecked for the time being. But if you did have something like that, you can certainly incorporate that into the tool. So the first thing, I'm gonna jump to my Files tab. I've got a project file open, or maybe I need to browse to a file to process it. I have the opportunity now to specify what I want to do. So if it's standalone Revit files, we can remove our backups, and therefore any backup that it finds in the folder, it doesn't have to be unique to that project. That gets a little sketchy because you may not know what's going on and who's working on what. But if it's your project and you know that you know everything that's happening, check the box. When it comes to working with any Revit file, I always audit it. And with work shared projects, especially if I'm receiving a model or submitting it for an archive and I got to move it to a different location, you certainly need to open it detached with another save after the fact. So those options are built in. And if you're going to move the file from one location to the next, we have the ability for you to do that here. So after processing the file, where do you want it to go? So if it's something you downloaded just recently, you're pulling it out of the downloads folder. We're going to send it to the P drive for our projects, or we're going to send it to the A drive for my archives. It's entirely up to you if you even need to do that, right? So, but you have the ability to find the original path and then replace it with the new path at the end of the day. And that's what that process is intended for here. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to open it up detached and do my save as with an audit, mind you. So that first part is just how are we dealing with file and its saving properties. Then we move on to the nuts and bolts and the actual tasks that happen within the Revit file itself. One thing I should mention before I get too far ahead is back on the projects tab. A big thing that's we get a lot of questions for is BIM 360 projects, or ACC projects. Everybody's using those these days, right? And it makes perfect sense. It allows us for the utmost collaboration on jobs and the flexibility to kind of work where we want or where we need to, right? We can process files hosted in BIM 360 or in the Autodesk Construction Cloud as a unified project, as long as it's open. So if I open that file, I can add it as an open project and we can process it and we can do some cleanup on that file, no problem. The kicker is if you wanted to do it more of an automated thing where it's kind of headless sort of thing, let the tool open the file, do the work, close the file. That part is coming and will be in the next update or in a future update. I shouldn't say next update. It'll be in a future update where we'll have that ability. But for now, you can process that file as long as it's open, just like I'm about to do with this file. So now that I've said that, now we get into the different tasks. So I have options for renaming, swapping, cleaning, purging, parameter manipulation, and links, right? So 6 kind of key areas of work that take a lot of time normally that we can do rather quickly with this tool. So the rename tab is great if you need to change view names or view templates or view filters or the sheets. Oftentimes the things change as we go, or you weren't really, you have your standard in the template where your sheets are listed a certain way, but they need to be repurposed. We can go ahead and rename a bunch of our sheets right here and just pick it by a series of set properties. Or maybe all of our empty sheets, we've gotten to the point now where my empty sheets are no longer going to be used. I don't need them, right? But I don't want to get rid of them just in case I need to recycle something. So I can rename all the empty sheets to be not used, right? We can call it that, for example. And then be done with it. And it's regardless of who did it or what the sheet number was, but that's what we're gonna do. And as long as it's empty, right? And then if there's any other renaming options that need to happen in here, as far as your filters and what type of filter needs to be renamed, or if there's a piece of text within there or a series of text in there that needs to change, you can do a find and replace. Oftentimes, you'll see this either happening with views and or sheets, right? Maybe you get all these dependent views, and that's in the name, right? But we don't want that in the name. Maybe I want to change it to area A, B, C. You can do that and find it dependent and call it area, and so on and so forth. So you have the ability to set up some rules to go ahead and make that work out. On the swapping piece, this is basically type swapper or pieces of type swapper incorporated into project processors. So if there's ever some dimensions or text or line styles and patterns or fill patterns or materials that are actively being used in the project and we need to switch them out with something else. Perfect example is with text and or dimensions, but maybe you've got text styles that are the old text styles, right? Or what the previous default was. In this case, 3/32 Arial narrow. I no longer want to use Arial narrow. I'm just going to go with stock Arial. And I've already got that style made in my project. And I'm just going to go ahead now and swap it and let the program do it for me. And I can specify now the current project for my initial sample, make sure it does the job, but then I can apply that to all my other projects. So I don't have to manually go in there and select things and replace them myself. Same thing with dimensions, right? It gives you everything. So it gives you the breakdown by the dimension style, effectively, or the family of dimension, then the style within, and what you want to swap it to, right? So you get that whole breakdown just like you would with type swapper, or similar properties apply if you're just trying to do it manually by yourself. And so you get a lot of options here. And then similarly with line styles, right? You get all of the stuff that's in the program, and anything that was brought in from an import and maybe exploded. And sometimes those things are used, like this ano-center or ano, right? I don't need those. I want to get those out of there. So in the event that they are used, I want to make sure that they're replaced with something else first before I delete them. So I'm going to go through here and grab ano to detail 01 and ano center to detail 01 center, so that now I can purge these out freely at the end of the day after I've made sure that these were nice and swapped. So that's kind of the idea. And you can build out as many of these as you need to. I know I've done onesie, twosies, but if you had half dozen, dozens of line styles, maybe you changed everything up, and instead of renaming them, you rebuilt them, or you migrated a bunch from an old project, and now they're polluting everything. We can basically batch process that so that they use the appropriate set of stuff. Very commonplace if you're pulling stuff from drafting views in other projects or from an old project. You start to inherit a lot of old legacy information. Really slick way to get rid of a lot of that stuff. Now the clean area. Now this is the one that has the most options. It's almost like a super purge in a way, but with some configurability, right? So instead of just it being a blind purge, and it's, I just purge all my sheets and purge all my views and do all these things, I can get specific, and I can add some rules to this to make sure that I purge out only what I want to purge out, or I should say clean out. Okay, so perfect example is views that are not being used, right? So as you can see kind of here in the background, I got a whole bunch of views that are not on sheets, right? And if I'm submitting this for an archive or sending it off to someone else so that they can use it as a background, they don't need all my unused views, right? And deleting a lot of the unused views potentially opens the door for additional content to be purged to lighten the load. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those. So you can, nickel and dime it and pare it down to exactly what you need, either by discipline, by type, dependency, phase, what templates are assigned, what sheets they're on, specific names and values, or any other view-based property. In this case, I need a bigger selection. I'm not going to pare it down to be anything very terribly specific. So I'm going to get rid of all of the views that have no dependence and whose sheet is not present. Basically, it's not on a sheet. I don't need it, right? And then I can add a second one that says, if it is a dependent view and not on a sheet, let's get rid of that too, right? I don't want the extra fluff in my file. And then similarly down the line here, we have our sheets and view templates and filters and links and imports. I mean, I can't tell you how many view templates get created throughout the course of a project that really aren't needed, or they thought they needed it, but then we found out that we had a template that basically did what we needed to, and I shouldn't have made that in the first place. Now I can go back and make sure that those are all gone, or I changed my standard again, right? So there's, I can do a blind, just get rid of the unused view templates. That's it. Or I can go through and specifically grab things for a certain discipline or a certain type of view with a certain name associated to it. I'm just going to say delete the ones that aren't used across the board. Keep it simple. And then the same thing can go with filters, right? We have all of these different filters in projects that either come when we do a transfer project standards or they're buried in the templates and we don't really always know what they're for, but we're not using them in a lot of cases. Or you made a bunch and you were tinkering, so you duplicated things. Regardless, right? I've got a few things here that I can get rid of. So I can get explicit and build out a few, or just get rid of them all, right? So I can say, well, let's do my parameter-based filters, and let's go ahead and get rid of the wall. Oop, I accidentally switched, and let's do it again. And let's just grab the ones that are truly unnecessary. So these were for a unique project. They're not here. This is not that project, or that project is over, so they can go away. And and then if you need to, you can go through and select which ones are based off a selection filter and pick those out as well. Mine are all parameter-based filters, and I know that. So I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it set to that and grab a few that I don't. Actually, I want to keep that one. Just kidding. That one. So we'll grab a handful and then, continue moving on. So I've got linked files and imports. Maybe I just don't want CAD imports in my file anymore, or any import for that matter. So I can grab imports and just leave it set to all. But we also have the used, unused, pick by name and whatnot, right? I'm just gonna blindly get rid of the imports. I know I don't want them. I want them linked. So easy decision for me. Same thing with images, right? Like if they're unused images, I certainly don't want them in my project. And if they are being used, I want to know about it because I want to go ahead and make sure that there's a good reason they're used. Sometimes people insert an image of a detail and that they just call it a day because I ran out of time. Like, to me, that, like, no, don't do it. So, and then we have options for parameters and line styles, patterns, fill patterns, viewport types. It's another big one that you get a lot of, like viewport 1 or viewport 2, and depending on how you've brought views into your projects. So to me, I've only got viewport 1 at this point, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But I did a text style swap. Let's go ahead and get rid of that one that I no longer need, right? We're going to get rid of Arial Narrow. I got rid of it and I swapped it, or I will be swapping it. So let's get rid of the one I no longer need. Okay. Yeah, you're right. So we had a question come in that says, the option I selected for is a dependent, and actually said is independent. So there are two. I'm not, I guess, so I did have is independent, and that just means it's not kind of linked to anything. I might have said is dependent in my discussion, which I probably did, and grabbed the wrong one. So thank you for pointing that out. I would have gotten rid of a handful of other views that I wouldn't have meant to get rid of, but that's okay. But one of the things that I was going to mention, and I'll say now, is test this process before you do it on a live project. Don't ever do this on a live project without knowing what's going to happen, because you could really blow something up otherwise. So there is a difference between some of these. So in case, for those of you that aren't truly aware what some of this stuff is, dependent view is the area plan A, B, C. So right now, what I've told, and then is independent, is a view that wasn't built based off something else, right? So it's the parent view, not the child view in a sense. So, or doesn't have any callouts associated with it. So independent means that there's no dependence and does not have any views referencing it, is what the independent means. Now, independent can technically still have dependence, which is why we have that last option at the end for no dependence and is independent. So, but basically it just means that independent means there aren't any view reference tags pointing to it or callouts built within it with views on other sheets tying back to it, right? It's kind of its own beast. It's just a view. A lot of times those are like a 3D view, oftentimes are what those end up being. So not referenced would be a good option to add. You are absolutely right. Sorry, I'm gonna go back and do that. And so yeah, in this case, I'll end up with a lot of my floor plans that don't have dependents that are not on sheets getting blown away. And a lot of my 3D views that are not on sheets are also going to get blown away. Right? Those are kind of the two areas that I'm focusing on here at this point with this example. Okay, so the cleaning, fill pattern, just to be clear on this, is anything that's defined in the file. So whether it's type of drafting or type model, it's going to give you the definition name of it. It's not the region of it. This is what you would find if you were to go to the additional settings, fill patterns. That's that list. Okay, I'm not touching those for right now. And so textiles, I did actually set that up. Okay, great. So now we come down to purge. So the purge is purge, right? However, we do give you a little bit more where we get you, it's kind of broken up. So, so simplified with some extra options, right? It's get rid of all my unused families and symbols, or all my system families, or both. Line styles and patterns, materials versus assets. Like maybe I want to get rid of the assets and not the material, So now some of these make it take longer. And depending on the size of the project and the number of styles and patterns and materials in the file, can take much longer. So for example, if you were to bring in an AutoCAD drawing and explode it, and that AutoCAD drawing had 1,000 layers in it, now you have 1,000 line styles and potentially another 100 line patterns that came along for the ride. And then on top of that, a few dozen more hatch patterns or fill patterns. So those can, just that alone, and as we all know, that can just muddy up a file real quick. But that can also make this process take that much longer. If generally speaking, you do a pretty good job and you just have a couple here and there that are added that shouldn't be, it's not going to add a ton of time. But it saves you the hassle of having to hit those one at a time manually with the mouse. So project by project by project. So even if it takes more time, we're still saving some and not pulling our hair out trying to delete those one at a time. So the purge options are there. I'm not going to hit any on this one. For the parameters, this is giving us the opportunity now to add shared parameters to our project. And setting up some base properties. So similar to how Shared Parameter Manager allows us to load parameters into projects, this is effectively doing something similar. So I can specify my shared parameter file and add any parameter from it that I choose and assign which category of content to associate it with. And then is it going to be an instance and type? And if the instance, does it vary between groups? So it's very similar options to if you were to build these out manually. And again, building them out manually is a slow going process, right? So I can just use the tool to batch load these in. Maybe I need my facilities management ones. We're giving it to the owner. And now I can go ahead and come over here and check all of my equipment and devices categories. So fire alarm, electrical equipment and fixtures, and accessories and various other pieces of equipment. So, and you hit OK, and it's going to add all three. In this case, as an instance, you choose where you want it organized in the properties, whether it's identity data, general, construction, depending on what it is. Mine are going to go under identity data. And then there's this last piece here called value source parameter. Now, let's say we have a couple of extra check boxes over here on the side. So we have the ability to add it as a schedule column first and foremost, right? So if there's a schedule, we can have it added to a schedule, right? Or make it schedulable. And then if there is a value source, then I have the ability to say, remove the source parameter and insert this one in its place. So I'm almost swapping parameters now. I can either remove it and insert one, or I can replace it with my new one, or just remove the source if it's even specified. I don't have to specify anything. So this is just a nice way to add something in and then to take a location of where it needs to go. And then last but not least, we have the ability to work with linked models, CAD and Revit, and specify the file itself and where we're reloading it from. Things change, projects move, especially if we're moving a project from one location to the next, and the pathing is not set to be relative, right? It's absolute. Then I need to absolutely update those paths. And this is how I can go ahead and do that. So I can say find, the explicit Revit file at this location and then replace it with the destination path. Now, or maybe you copied one and now you've got two links in here with the same name. You can effectively turn one into the other and get rid of the duplicate. So there's a couple of different ways to go about this. And then there's the setting to include or exclude from work shared projects. I personally would prefer using import link manager simply because I have more control over there and I can pin things. I can change the work set they're on. I can see if it's room bounding or not. I can interface with loading and reloading of files on BIM 360 in the cloud. So I tend to leave this one out from my workflow at the moment, but it's doable. You can do some minor, reload froms if you need to effectively with this tool. So yeah, and then and you might have noticed this throughout as I opened new areas or added new rows and whatnot. There's a wildcards will work to an extent, right? So there are some scenarios where it will work, and then some scenarios where they won't, and you just have to pick all, right? But when all is not an option, you can use a star something to find what you're looking for. Okay, like arc star or star arc or star aerial, right? That kind of thing will work, but not everywhere. There are some places where there is an option, or more properties across the row there that need to be defined, which effectively do that for you or help you build that out without actually doing a wildcard. And even some of those will support a wildcard. So in this case, I'm going to yank this one back out because I got this one set the way I wanted it to do. And at this point, I've set it up the way I want it to set it up, and I can save it. And we'll call it base cleanup. Save it to my settings folder. And now I can test this out, or I can run it on other projects, or I can do various other things with it. And then you would hit start. Now, if there is something wrong with your setup, you won't be able to run it. So I did something in here that, oh yeah, I didn't actually specify a filter to rename. So if I need to remove that, and that's not properly defined either. So we'll just get rid of this altogether, and then what else did I accidentally turn on? At any rate, though, you would hit start, and once you find which one you turned on that you weren't supposed to turn on, you can run it. And then it'll take anywhere from a couple minutes to a few dozen minutes, potentially. Again, it depends on how heavy duty of a process you ran here. And then it'll be finished. So, and then the next project, you can just load it up and continue on where you left off, or enhance the script, save it again, run it again, and keep on kind of going down the line here. Now, so I set something up almost spot on, similar to this. And although I made a mistake in this one because I can't hit start, and I don't even know where I made that mistake now at this point. But I did do it shortly before our meeting today, and you can see already by looking at the project browser here, it's blown away quite a few views. And you notice all I have left, with the exception of my drafting view, my exit view here, are views on sheets, right? That's because I told it, get rid of everything that's not on a sheet, right? The reason why I couldn't get rid of this view, which is not on a sheet, is because I had it open, and it was the only view I had open when I ran it. So Revit doesn't like deleting things that are in use, as you know, so it didn't delete it, which is great. Now I'm okay. But it did everything else I told it to do. You will get the opportunity to get a log. It'll give you a report at the end of the day when you're done. I think I had about 1,800 tasks run ultimately, or elements modified on my process. And I only had one error or warning, and that was because it couldn't add one of my shared parameters because it already existed in the project. So, you know, it was already done for me. And those reports can be saved to Excel or copy pasted to a Word document. And you're free to use it as you need to at that point. And I think my Word document was, of that 1,800 item report, was 100 pages. And that's extra spacing and the formatting and text sizes and all that good stuff. But you know, you can tell in a 4 or 5 minute process, it did a lot of work. So that concludes my presentation today. I hope you guys saw something that you liked about Project Processor. And I want to thank you all for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. I love doing these webinars for you guys every week. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week when we do our next Revit session. Hope everyone takes care, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.